Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow for so many people out there. Today we have the honor of being joined by Professor Dr. Mark Schreim, International Chief Medical Officer at Mercy Ships and lecturer in global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Schreim previously served as the O'Brien Chair of Global Surgery at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, as founder and director of the Center for Global Surgery Evaluation at Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary, and as research director for the program in global surgery and social change at Harvard. Dr. Schreim is the author of many seminal papers on the global burden of surgical disease, the financial burden facing surgical patients, as well as papers on the number of people out there that just cannot access safe surgery in the world today. He's also served as co-author on Lancet Condition on Global Surgery. Dr. Schreim graduated summa cum laude from Princeton with a bachelor's in molecular biology, received his medical degree from University of Texas, and then after taking a year to teach organic chemistry in Singapore, medical school was followed by a residency in otolaryngology at Columbia Cornell program in Manhattan, followed by a fellowship in head and neck surgical oncology, University of Toronto, completed a SECO fellowship in microvascular reconstructive surgery, also at University of Toronto, and amongst his works, he was one of the first to identify a novel independent prognostic indicator of head and neck cancers. To date, Dr. Schreim has worked and taught throughout the world, a lot of activity in West Africa and Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, Benin, Togo, as well as Congo, Cameroon, Madagascar, Saudi Arabia, and Haiti. In 2011, he graduated Master's in Public Health in Global Health from Harvard School of Public Health, where he was a finalist for both the Albert Schweitzer Award and the Student Recognition Award. And in 2015, he was served his PhD in health policy from Harvard with a concentration in decision science, numerous awards, accolades, research support, a lot of things we go into there, but I really like to talk to him. In addition to all of what I've just mentioned, he is an accomplished author as well with his recently released book, Solving for Why, A Surgeon's Journey to Discover the Transformative Power of Purpose, just being released. And when he's not focusing on all of that, Dr. Schreim is a photographer, a public speaker, rock climber, and you probably have seen him on different seasons of American Ninja Warrior. We're honored to have him with us today. Dr. Mark Schreim, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. You have such an amazing background. In your book, in Solving for Why, you start off with a bang with many stories about things like a gun being pointed at you when you're only 1 year old in the Lebanese Civil War, a shotgun being pointed at you in Texas, a van that you're in careening off a road that almost ended your life in Monrovia, Liberia. And in the middle of all that, you take time to describe yourself as a surgeon who never wanted to be a doctor, an Arab who grew up thinking Arabs were dirty people, and then ultimately someone who loves working in Africa nowadays, who used to pray that you would never end up there. Mark, introduce yourself. Talk a little bit about who you are and a little bit about this background story, because it is fascinating.
Thank you. You spent a good 60 seconds on the introduction. It's been a bit of a, I guess it's had you told me, I don't know, when I was 16 about all the things that had happened, that you just said happened, that you just described, I would have probably, I don't know, I would have not believed you. Yeah, I would love to say that that this life course was completely planned out from the beginning, but not at all. You know, as you mentioned, I you know, adamantly, actively resisted trying to become a doctor. You know, my handwriting is, as an example, my handwriting is pretty terrible. Still remains terrible. So as a kid, the adults around me would make fun of me and say, you know, he's clearly going to be a doctor. And I'd be like, no, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a rock star, or I want to be a philosopher, or I want to be a linguist. I want to do all these sorts of things. But I'm also the firstborn son of an immigrant family, as you mentioned. And, you know, firstborn sons of immigrant families have three choices: doctor, lawyer, or failure. So kind of stumbled into medicine, not, I didn't stumbled in, was kind of dragged into medicine, kicking and screaming. And a lot of what you talked about was part of me is sort of trying to find a way to create a life that for myself had meaning, for that sort of fed this deeper desires, the things that I wanted to do with my life.
And, you know, as we sort of introduce the theme, and we'll get into it at various points of our discussion today, of social medicine, somebody that you worked with, you know, collaborated with over the years, the late Dr. Paul Farmer, you know, wrote about social medicine as sort of this this area that we've somewhat forgotten. We have this holy grail out there of in biomedicine today, of sort of the molecular basis of disease. But over time, with the exclusive focus on that area, and I come out of the pharmaceutical industry, we've desocialized scientific inquiry. We've have this tendency only to ask the biologic questions, but forget about the social phenomena around health, wellness, disease. Talk a little bit about what social medicine is and what it means to you.
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought up Paul. Very much a, you know, as you know, a thought leader and a pioneer in this area. We have, and you know, you come out of the pharmaceutical industry, I come out of surgery, where we also want to cut things out and be done with it. So we have a very reductionistic approach to health. And, you know, since its founding, the WHO has tried to go against that. WHO's definition of health includes physical, mental, and social well-being. Explicitly says that it's not just the absence of disease, but that it is well-being. So that, you know, there's always been this push to view health in this more holistic fashion. But holistic, at least when I was in training, holistic became kind of a bad word. Social medicine, social determinants of disease is another phrase you'll hear often.
Yep.
Just sort of takes into account the fact that our wellness is tied to more than just the, you know, biological issues happening inside our body, tied more than just to the Krebs cycle, or, you know, whatever it is that we all learn in undergrad and in med school. But it's tied to where we were born, what environment we're currently living in, what access we have, both materially and otherwise, to health promoting behavior. You know, super easy, for example, to say eat healthy, but if there's no access to healthy food near you, well, we can say that all we want, but there is a social barrier against actually actively acting in that way. Social medicine, you know, takes all of that into account. You know, before I moved to this current job, when I was at Harvard's program in global surgery and social change, just adding that, you know, global surgery and social change is a recognition that the surgical ecosystem has to do with more things than just, you know, the cutting and the sewing. And improving the surgical system includes improving the entire ecosystem around surgery. It also includes improving, to quote Paul Farmer, the stuff, the staff, the space, and the systems that are needed to deliver care. And all four of those have to happen. I'm going to say one other thing. The thing that I've been excited to see happening probably the last sort of 7, 10, 15 years or so. I've been calling this the social outcomes of treatment,
Sure.
sort of to tie into the social determinants of health, the social outcomes of treatment as well, is acknowledging that the treatments that we do and the treatments that we ask patients to undertake also have an effect on more than just their health, have an effect on their finances, have an effect on their perception of themselves within the community, and for us to be recommending treatments to patients, we should at least have this in our mind. We should be able to speak intelligently to these things. Um, Instead of, as an example, instead of being angry about, I don't know, why, patient X decided to be quote unquote non-compliant, is understanding that non-compliance from that reductionistic medical view is actually compliance with a broader social, life that this patient is living.
Mhm.
And this patient has to balance all of these things and maybe decides, look, I'm just not going to take my cholesterol meds because I don't know, I can't afford them, or they do all these other things to me, and I'm going to choose an outcome that you as a doctor might not agree with, but it's an outcome that to me as a patient matters. I have now rambled forever, so I'll stop here.
No, 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 I appreciate those points, and it leads very nicely into the next discussion point. I mean, um, a couple of months ago, I had Dr. Peter Hotez on the show, and he, was talking about this theme of anti-poverty vaccines. He's working in this area of sort of neglected tropical diseases, and yes, we can affect the leishmaniasis or the hookworm or whatever. But these diseases, because of their effect on intellect, child intellect, worker productivity, and so forth, major trickle-down effect beyond just feeling a little better because I'm preventing that disease. You start publishing on this theme about 2015 on sort of the global financial burden of surgery, and this very interesting intersection. I've seen you talk about this in some of your presentations of surgery, development, but also impoverishment, and sort of the need to balance this three-way connection. And in one of the presentations, you give a really interesting example of a Madagascar rice farmer that has a facial tumor that, yes, we have the technology to remove it, but at the same time, in order to pay for it, he had to sell off his rice business, and now he's destitute. And we got to, coming back to the social story here, we got to think about how these systems work together, sort of the integrated component. Talk a little bit about sort of this intersection, because I think it's an extremely important point of what you're involved in and the things that you think about on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually just found out probably 2 weeks ago that that he ended up being able to get his rice farm back.
Nice.
I've been telling this story since 2015. I've been telling his story, and I didn't have follow up on this. I knew that he got back home and all this sort of stuff, and I literally just found out probably a couple weeks ago that I can actually put a nice bow around this and be like, well, he
Excellent.
did have to sell his rice farm, but but in the end he got it back. But actually, that actually tells a really important story. And kind of getting to what we were talking about before, is this man made a choice. He'd had this tumor, very large tumor, had been there for 30 years. I forget exactly how much it weighed, but it was a lot. It was bigger than his head. Um, and he made the choice. He had to balance this tension in his mind. I've lived with this tumor for 30 years. Do I pursue getting it removed, and sell my rice farm in the process? Or it's been there for 30 years. Do I just sort of live with it? I've kind of gotten used to it and keep my rice farm in the process. I think, especially in medicine, and especially perhaps my generation of doctors, I think this is better in the younger generations. We tend to preference health, narrowly defined biomedical health. We tend to preference that as some sort of special good, as some sort of a thing that should take precedence over everything else. And in doing so, were we to be told that this man decided to keep his tumor and his rice farm at the same time, we might look at that and be like, well, that's a crazy decision. But as I was saying before, it's not a crazy decision. It is a decision that is placed in the context of the rest of his life. We published a paper 2017, 2018, trying to get at this question in Americans. This was a US-based paper, trying to get at this question of how much of a risk of bankruptcy would you be willing to accept to be cured of a lethal disease? Because again, when I was training, when I came up through the medical system, the answer would have been infinity. What, of course, without your health, you're nothing. Health is wealth. All those things that we've been taught. So I have an incurable, or I have a lethal disease. You can cure it for me. I would pay all the money in the world. And we still kind of operate under that assumption, but that's not true. And it turned out that only about a third of our respondents in this survey, only about a third of our respondents actually took that health at all costs approach. The majority of respondents had a more balanced approach. Health was anywhere between 2 and 5 times more important than financial solvency. So more important, but not like infinitely more important. And then about 1 in 12 respondents were the exact opposite. They were, I would rather be dead than bankrupt. So we need to have that in our minds as we're talking to patients. They are balancing this. So we need to learn to sort of help them with whatever information we can give them so that they can make the most informed decision.
Currently, in addition to the role at Harvard, as I mentioned in the intro, you're the International Chief Medical Officer for Mercy Ships, but you started with you were involved in the organization 16 years ago, and I think in addition to everything I mentioned about the van in Liberia and the shotgun and all that stuff, you described sort of the first day you stepped on sort of the deck of the first Mercy ship you got involved in as another very seminal aha moment in your career. Before we get into your current role, talk a little bit about 16 years ago and what happened that day when you first stepped on the deck in the first Mercy ship.
Yeah, great question. To do that, I'm going to actually to go back even further.
Okay.
So as I mentioned earlier, I never wanted to be a doctor. So when I went into med school, to sort of fulfill filial obligations, and that's never really a good reason to do anything. So I, hated med school. Picked a specialty for what I thought it would allow me to do outside of medicine, and ended up not liking that specialty either. So, I don't want to belabor the point, but over the basically 15 years between the time I graduated high school and the time that this event that you're talking about happened, I went through all the medical training, and to a large degree, with some small exceptions, like actually hated it. Tried to quit this path a gajillion times. Took time off a couple of times in it just to sort of try to get away from this path of medicine, and basically was too chicken to stay off this path of medicine, kept going back to it. So 15 years of post-secondary education that I mostly hated. And then after my first fellowship, took a year off and spent 6 months of that year just traveling, being, a complete consumer. And then 6 months of the year operating as a head and neck surgeon on that Mercy ship back in 2008. And yeah, so what happened that day, it was the first day I walked onto that ship. The ship itself is 8 decks tall, and the hospital sits on the 3rd deck. So walking down the stairs from deck 5, which is where you first enter the ship, deck 5 down to deck 3, where the hospital is, making a right-hand turn into the maxillofacial and head and neck ward, and seeing about a dozen patients with head and neck tumors at various stages in recovery, really, it was a road to Damascus moment. It was this like, oh my God, this is what I had been training for 15 years to do, and I didn't even know it. So I despise the phrase life-changing, except I'm genuinely going to use it here because that event literally changed the course of the rest of my career.
And now, you're in the role of this International chief medical officer, and just to read through a few of sort of the facts about Mercy Ships. You're active in 55 different countries now, have provided close to $1.75 billion of services, about close to 3 million beneficiaries, and you have a crew of everybody, all nurses and other healthcare training surgeons, dentists. Mark, talk a little bit about sort of what you do on a day. I mean, what your role is currently, and a little bit of how you guide the organization in this incredible role that you find yourself in 2022.
Yeah, no, it's an honest privilege to say that I'm in this role. A little bit about the organization, a little bit sort of about the model itself. The organization delivers surgical care, training, infrastructure development, research, monitoring and evaluation, et cetera, from the decks of hospital ships. So there are currently 2 hospital ships that are in active service. So at any one time, the organization's ships will be in 1 or 2 countries, depending on whether one is being repaired. Mm-hmm. Be in 1 or 2 countries. However, we take a longer approach to country engagement. The ships are in country for about 10 months at a time, but we engage with countries and with the health systems for about 5 years at a time, with only 10 of those months being with the ship actually there, actively there. In this position, I've only been in this position since August of 2022. So there is a bit of, I'm still finding my feet. It's been 3 months. But the position that I've stepped into is in charge of the programmatic work that we do. So the healthcare delivery, the training, the advocacy, et cetera, all the things that I mentioned fall under the chief medical officer's remit. And it's a really exciting time to be working in this. As the global surgery conversation has changed over the last 15 years from, for lack of a better word, from sort of mission trips, surgical safari type engagements to longer term engagements, to much more of a view towards sustainability and I've used this word already, but sort of ecosystem change. Mm-hmm. How can we, as an organization that's based on ships, participate in that? I'm going to call back again to Paul Farmer. Paul and Father Gutierrez talk a lot about the idea of accompaniment. That our role is not to tell people what to do. Our role is to ask, what are you, country X hoping to do in the next 5 years with your surgical system? And then how can we, with our particular platform, be of benefit in that? That's the direction of travel that I'm really hoping we continue to go on the ship. That's the direction that I want us to dig into.
Excellent. I want to ask I mentioned a lot of your publications in the peer-reviewed literature on sort of the financial burden of surgery, of taking care of surgical patients and so forth, start around 2015. If we go back into the early 2000s, a lot of your publications are on your work in otorhinolaryngology. You write about squamous cell carcinoma of the oral cavity, techniques for lip reanimation. And then in the middle of it all, there's a paper that doesn't fit with any of these themes, but it popped out at me because I used to work in the natural product space and had a chocolate company investor at one point. But in the Journal of Nutrition, November 2011, you published a paper entitled Flavonoid-Rich Cocoa Consumption Affects Multiple Cardiovascular Risk Factors in a Meta-Analysis of Short-Term Studies. I assume this had some connection with the amount of time you spent in West Africa and the fact that we get most of our cacao from over there. But just talk about what was going on in November 2011 that you got involved in this study.
What a random paper to pick out, but you're right. It kind of stands out. It doesn't fit with the rest of the portfolio. No, it had nothing to do with the work in West Africa, actually.
Okay.
This paper was, it was during my my Master's of Public Health, and it was the outflow of a class that I took with the co-authors on the paper, a class on how to do meta-analyses.
Got it.
So yeah, it was, we just, I forget which one of us had it wasn't me. One of my co-authors had the idea of like, hey, let's look at chocolate. And so we did. And yeah, this paper is the outcome.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I just, as I said, I had some.
It doesn't fit. You're right.
But I had some very interesting run-ins with the patents surrounding these different flavonoids from both Nestle and the Mars company. That's a whole other story, but
I'm sure
it's still pretty fascinating. But that being said, on a serious topic related to chocolate, and then in general, sort of scientific publishing, the Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs paper and the predatory medical journals follows this. But then you also, you publish, I mean, not that was not a serious paper, but then you published recently on predatory publishing in the era of COVID. Talk a little bit, because I know this is another area that is important to you, and that, I think we don't hear as much about, but if you could tell the story of what you did with the Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs paper, and a little bit about your concern about predatory publishing in 2022.
Absolutely. I love talking about this. So this was, the short story on this is, you should never give a PhD student who's in the middle of writing his dissertation any time to do anything else, because this was what happens. I was like stuck on some problem in my dissertation, and and as you will know, and as many of your listeners will know, constant emails from predatory journals asking you for your, greetings of the day, please send in your esteemed paper on X, Y, and Z. And I was getting so tired of them that I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I went to randomtextgenerator.com, generated 3,000 words of absolutely random text. Like there is no rhyme or reason to this paper. The sentences do not make sense. Entitled it Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. The authors were Orson Welles and Pinkerton LeBrain, and then sent it out to 34 different journals, of which 17 of them accepted it. Claiming that they had subjected it to rigorous scientific review. One of the reviews that I got complimented me on my statistical methods. Bearing in mind, all of this is random text.
Right.
And all of them asked for money to publish. I did not pay. I did somehow, because I don't even know how, somehow talk one of the journals into actually publishing it anyway. So there are PDFs out there. I think that it's been taken down now, but there are PDFs out there of this journal, this paper called Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. It really did get me, like, that came out of a sense of kind of annoyance with these spam emails, but that also kind of turned me on to the whole predatory publishing industry. Which is nefarious in so many aspects. It's nefarious in that, to a large degree, there's no licensing body that says these journals are okay and these journals are not. And what that means is that unless this happens to be your job, like unless you're a doctor or a researcher and you kind of know. Let's say you're a member of the lay public. Medicine's not your job, or you're a journalist, and it's harder to tell what is legit and what is not. And so misinformation, disinformation can get out there. One of the problems with it. The other problem with it is that, to a large degree, these journals, because their article publishing charges are lower than the legit journals, these journals target researchers within resource-constrained settings, who, because of the terribly colonialist way that science is still propagated, these researchers have harder times publishing their papers. And so you get an opportunity to publish a paper for $50. You end up getting getting fooled. And I see this happen often. I even see this happen in researchers who, are kind of more established, are still getting fooled by this. And then I also see it happen in my students and my trainees. So these journals it's their job to basically get money from researchers who have poured their time and energy and passions into their papers. Those papers never truly see the light of day. Yeah. And there's a disparity in who is targeted by those things. For all those reasons, I am passionate about this topic.
A couple of weeks ago, you published an editorial entitled "Teaching Someone to Fish: The False Dichotomy of Relief and Development," talking about the dichotomy of global health, about why we can't be doing these. We need to be doing these two things together. They shouldn't be mutually exclusive of one another. Just distill this for a second. I mean, obviously, we talked about the connection with surgery and what you've been involved in. But if I was to make you the president of the world or one of these major sustainable development goal institutions, UN, WHO, whatever, what do you want to see happening in 2023 and beyond in terms of sort of the breaking this false dichotomy, in terms of, as you say, fishing while learning how to fish at the same time?
Yeah, listen, that's exactly it. That phrase, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, yeah. Teach a man a fish, you feed him for a lifetime, is a false dichotomy. Yeah. We can and should be doing both. It's hard to learn to fish when you're hungry. That has analogies to the work that we do in global health. There is very appropriate, I do not think this is inappropriate, there is very appropriate push that the work that we should be doing in global health has to be sustainable. Yeah. Sustainability has become a catch-all term, hard to define. All those things are true. And yet, I also do think it's true that the work that we have to do has to accompany health systems toward development. But we have swung very far on that pendulum, such that there's this sort of unspoken presupposition that any work that we do that isn't sort of branded sustainable is therefore bad. And there are understandable reasons for that. There's plenty of evidence for poorer outcomes in some of the work that we do if we're not focusing on development. There's plenty of evidence for creations of false dependencies. And at the same time, we can acknowledge all those things and also say that, yes, development is the goal, but health systems take a long time to develop. The American health system took a very long time to develop. There are fascinating books on the development of the American healthcare system. And in the interim, as development happens, what happens to my guy that I was talking about before with a large facial tumor that he'd had for 30 years? These are real human lives that, as we sort of are high and mighty and focus on our development, these are real human lives that are not currently accessing healthcare systems and surgical systems. So instead of creating this false dichotomy, I think this false dichotomy between quote unquote relief and development, I think that the two camps can and should work together, can and should inform each other. That, as you just said, that we can fish, we can provide fish while learning how to fish at the same time.
Mark, you competed, as I mentioned in the intro, seasons 8, 9, and 11 of American Ninja Warrior. We can go to YouTube right now and watch you train. Extremely impressive. At the same time, you do rock. Were you a rock climber before you did the American Ninja, or was the American Ninja sort of got you into rock climbing, and then are you headed back? Are you going to try to get to Mount Midoriyama anytime soon? I'm sure you have a lot on your plate, but like, what's the next plan? Because I take my hat off. I mean, it's very impressive to that salmon ladder stuff always scares me a bit. Someone that can only do about
best.
8 chin-ups myself. But talk a little bit about if you have got anything coming up and what it was like competing in this. While
Yeah.
everything else going on.
So, wow, talking to you, I'm starting to realize that that all of my decisions seem to just sort of happen by being bored. But the Ninja Warrior. So I was a rock climber before. I was
Okay.
growing up. I was not athletic at all. I grew up in sort of the '80s in Texas, and so it was baseball, basketball, football, or soccer. I did play soccer, didn't like it, and didn't really like the other sports. So I kind of wish rock climbing had existed when I was younger, but it really didn't as a sport like it does today. That the person on the street can access.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't get into rock climbing until I was in my 30s, and really, really took to it. I still love that sport. It's the perfect sport for an introvert like me. Because if you want to be social, rock climbers are amazing people. But then if you want to just sort of have a Zen moment where it's just you versus the wall, then you can just tune everything else out and it's you versus the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd really gotten into rock climbing. And then one night, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning when all the best decisions happen, I was watching YouTube videos of people doing Ninja Warrior, and had this moment of complete hubris. I was like, oh, this looks easy. I can do this. So applied. It's an 8-page application. You have to send in a three-minute video. Applied and kind of forgot about it. Honestly, it's like there's no way they're going to be interested in a 41-year-old dorky surgeon from Boston. So when they called me to compete, I had not done anything to prepare. So they called me to compete. They said, we want you in Philadelphia in 3 weeks. And I was like, okay, let me find a ninja gym. And so I found one in Boston, went there for the first time 3 weeks before going on the show, and couldn't complete a single obstacle at all. Met some amazing people at that gym, many of whom remain friends to this day. Trained as much as I could in those 3 weeks, got on the show, did decently, and an obsession was born. What is next with that? It's a good question. About a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, I took a really bad fall and basically destroyed every ligament and bone in my knee. So I've been, it's a great advertisement right now for your listeners to get onto Ninja Warrior. Destroyed my knee. So I've been rehabbing since then. I would love to get back to it. I miss this sport all the time. I miss climbing too. I also am starting to realize I'm 48. The people who do well at this sport are like 21. So it's possible that my time as a ninja is ending, but I'm not willing to accept that yet. I've told my physical therapist that I desperately want to get back, and he's like, all right, we'll get you back. So we'll see when that happens.
Excellent. Putting a ninja aside, Mark, what else is happening in terms of the remainder of 2022 as we enter 2023? Conferences that you're going to be presenting at, places where we can meet you, listen to you, and anything else on the schedule that you want to mention in terms of everything you got going on, please take the floor.
No, thank you. At this point, there aren't conferences scheduled. I literally just came back from speaking at the Wyoming Medical Society, which was the last conference that's on my calendar. But I am always happy to speak at these things. For the rest of 2022, I have got this job to get my feet under the table. I am working on another book proposal, so hoping that gains some traction. And I continue to write. The writing has slowed down a little bit since this job started, but I'm on Medium. at Shrime.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me on Twitter at Mark Shrime. Yeah, that's what I've got going on right now.
Awesome. Oh, and we'll put links to everything that you're involved in the bio of the show. It's a truly fascinating journey you've been on, Mark, and it's so impressive where you've gone, what you're continued to do, and it's going to be fun to continue to follow you and watch the evolution of this story. For everybody that is going to be listening to this episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been listening to Professor Dr. Mark Shrime, International Chief Medical Officer, Mercy Ships, lecturer in global health and social medicine, Harvard Medical School. Pick up his book, Solving for Why, A Surgeon's Journey to Discover the Transformative Power of Purpose. Mark, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about all these fun topics. Thanks for obviously doing them and being involved in this area. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there via what you've been involved in and what you continue to do. Very impressive story.
Thank you so much for having me.